So 4 hours and 45 minutes. That was the mean, the average daily social media usage reported by undergraduate students at the University of South Alabama. Let's assume that our average age of the respondents is 21 years old, and the average lifespan being about 73 years. And as with any scientific endeavor, we first have to make our observation. And let's make that observation by extrapolating this statistic out over the course of a human lifetime. So, in 1 week, that 4 hours and 45 minutes turns into 33 hours and 15 minutes. In 1 month, that 4 hours and 45 minutes turns into about 5.5 days. In 1 year, that 4 hours and 45 minutes turns into 72 days. And over the course of a human lifetime, that 4 hours and 45 minutes turns into an incredible 10 years, 3 months, and 5 days. An absolutely insane statistic to think about. So with that observation being made, the next phase of our scientific endeavor will be to begin asking questions. But thankfully, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and many of these questions that we have already been answered before us. So let's start out with some fundamental questions. First, the definition of social media. According to Merriam-Webster, that would be forms of electronic communication through which users create online communities to share information, ideas, personal messages, and other content such as videos. Examples of that, we all know the big ones: the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram, the Snapchat, the TikTok. Those are all the big ones that we think about. But ones that are often overlooked are YouTube, WhatsApp, and even Khan Academy. Most people don't think that Khan Academy is actually a social media site, but it is. So the next question we might ask ourselves, what's the difference between communicating in person versus on social media? And the major primary difference would be those nonverbal cues. These are things such as your facial expressions, your body language, and your overall demeanor. And most experts would agree that over half of our communication with one another is through these nonverbal cues. So when we communicate on social media, those nonverbal cues, they go away. Another fundamental question we might ask ourselves is, who is using social media? Who uses social media the most? What types of social media are they using? And there are two primary things that are going to determine what type of social media you use, that's in the site, and who is actually using social media. And those two things are going to primarily be your age and your gender. So first we're going to look at the age. So this is a Pew Research statistic that shows the percentage of US adults that said, yes, I use at least one social media site. So this study was done from 2006 all the way to 2021. So right around here, 2006, 2008, that was when Facebook started becoming big. The rise of Facebook became prevalent. And as we can see, this age group, 18 to 29, early age groups, they were early adopters of social media. But despite that, older age groups, even the 65 plus, have begun to steadily catch up in their usage of social media and begun incorporating it into their lives. And as we talked about with gender, we know that females are more likely to have higher social media usage than males. And those with higher educational achievement, some other demographics, are more likely to use LinkedIn, because you got to keep up your networking, you got to keep that up. Interestingly, Hispanics and other demographics and African Americans are more likely to use Instagram than white Americans. But it's important to note that a lot of these demographics, they overlap, and there are probably other reasons, other demographics that are more influential and important in determining their overall social media usage. So for example, with the Hispanic and African American statistic, this could be choked up due to the fact that the average age of Hispanic and African Americans is lower than white Americans. So it's likely that their age plays a larger role in their usage rather than their race. So what determines the type of social media that you use? So over here we have a Pew Research Center statistic that shows us some age gaps in terms of whether or not they're using social media and the type of social media that they're using. So for example, with the Snapchat here, let's take Snapchat for example. In the 18 to 29 age bracket, 65% said, yes, I use Snapchat. Whereas in the age 65 plus range, only 2% reported that they use Snapchat. That correlates to a 63 percentage difference points. Certain social media sites have larger age gaps than others. So for example, Snapchat and Instagram have some of the largest ones, whereas Facebook would have a much smaller age gap because you always got to keep up with your mom and your grandma on Facebook. So I'm a positive person, I'm a positive thinker. First I want to start out with some of the positive aspects of social media. And some of the obvious ones are keeping in touch with friends and family members, along with the business, advertising, and marketing aspect of social media. Next, I want to bring in some personal things that I love about social media, and it's about communities and following and engaging with our favorite influencers, some of whom are my favorites. I am Levy Rosman in the chess community, another one being Matt Diavella in the minimalist community. And without social media, we wouldn't be exposed to these new ideas, these influencers that have a large influence on our lives, and these communities, they wouldn't be as large, as big, nor as efficient. Similarly, social media can be an amazing thing for learning and education. In the example of Khan Academy and YouTube, Khan Academy in particular, the idea of free education, free learning for everyone, that is an aspect that came about from social media and from Khan Academy. In my particular experience, I love YouTube, and the amount of information that I can learn on YouTube is insane. Especially when I took organic chemistry. The organic chemistry tutor was my savior on YouTube. Practically taught me all of chemistry. Another positive aspect would be spreading social awareness and social movements. Something that we all might remember during the COVID-19 pandemic was the Black Lives Matter and during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so these are some of the photos. But the important thing to remember here is that these social movements, these communities, they wouldn't be as big, nor as large, nor as efficient, nor as effective if it were not for social media. Now with that being said, we're going to delve into some of the, I guess you could call them negatives, but the mental health sphere of social media. So right here you can see that social media use, increasing social media use, will increase your feelings of loneliness, your general anxiety, your social anxiety, your anxiety disorders, and your feelings of depression. So FOMO, the fear of missing out. This is an aspect that came about from social media, and it's that heightened sense of anxiety or worry that you experience whenever you think that and you feel that others are having more meaningful experiences than you. So as a result, you're more likely to use social media, engage on social media, and even go out to other events because you feel as though others are having more meaningful experiences, so you want to have those meaningful experiences too. So I provided this here because we're going to assume an example. So let's say we have Stacy, and Stacy just posted to Facebook this amazing Hawaiian beach sunset, and this came across your Facebook feed. And you're like, dang, Stacy's in Hawaii. She's having so much more of a meaningful experience than me. And quite objectively, she definitely is having more of a meaningful experience than you being in Hawaii on the beach. But little do you know, Stacy might be spiraling into depression or have really big feelings of loneliness, and she might have just lost her job. And these are things that are underlying that you're not aware of. But on the surface level, it looks like Stacy is having the most meaningful experiences of her life. So in terms of the mental health things that are associated with your increased social media usage, a big thing that's going to determine whether you're more likely to have those mental health repercussions is your gender. So men, when they have an increased social media use, they're more likely to have antisocial behaviors. Whereas women, and this is really bad for women. Women are more likely to have those body image issues, those mood disorders, and the cyberbullying, because you just provided a perfect way for relational women to bully each other online, not even in person. And then obviously, predators and unwanted content. So, as for the sphere of social media addiction, there is no ingrained terminology or established clinical classification for the term social media addiction. So as a result, it's not perceived as a disorder by the DSM-5 or the World Health Organization. And more research really needs to be done on whether or not this is just an addiction or a dependency. So the difference between these two terms would be an addiction means that there's a certain molecule that's binding in your brain, and when that molecule goes away, for example, in nicotine, in tobacco, when that molecule goes away, then you have those withdrawal symptoms. A dependency, you're going to have those withdrawal symptoms whenever the thing goes away, but there's not a particular molecule that's associated with the addiction aspect of it. With that being said, I'm going to show you this graph or this chart over here, this figure. So we have pretty much a neurological brain scan that shows giving versus getting likes on social media, and it shows neurological activation. So A up here, this is the neurological activation in the brain whenever you're giving likes, whenever you're liking someone else's posts on social media. The getting likes, there's more neurological activation than when you're getting likes, when you're receiving those likes. And this all plays into a type of dopamine reward system called the variable reward system, which in gambling, it's like playing the slot machine, seeing, oh, what I get next? Oh, what I get next? Oh, did I get anything? That's the variable reward system. And social media is playing that variable reward system with you. So this study found that some brain morphology in terms of people who had higher excessive social media use. And it found that the gray matter volume, so we have neurons in our brain, right? And the gray matter is the cell bodies of those neurons in our brain. That's the gray matter. This would be the white matter in our brain. So the gray matter in these two regions, the bilateral amygdala and the right striatum, the gray matter volume is reduced in those areas. So people with higher social media addiction scores or excessive social media, they have reduced gray matter volume in these two areas. So amygdalas and its function in social cognition, reward learning. The striatum function would be in decision making, motivation, reward perception. And in particular, this might be occurring due to the fact that as that keeps playing that variable reward system with you, it's becoming more efficient. So your body's becoming more efficient at processing that reward system that social media is playing on. So another aspect that's become very relevant today is TikTok and the ban of TikTok in the United States and over various through various different states. So in particular, these bans currently are on government devices and state networks because they believe that it's a privacy and security threat for America, being a company that is owned by China. So interestingly, I found this statistic, more than twice as many Americans support the US government banning TikTok as oppose it, though a sizable share are not completely sure if they support it being banned or not. But this topic in particular brings the idea of censorship, and does the government have the right to ban an entire social media site and censor ideas, those ideas, those communities that we talk about? Another thing that came up back in 2018 is when Facebook was grilled by the Senate on its data privacy issues. So Facebook collects a lot of data and sells that data to all kinds of different people. But the thing I want to point out right here is some people in the court proceedings did ask good questions. They had somewhat of an understanding of technology, but a large majority were technologically illiterate. And this is important because social media evolves, and it has been evolving very, very quickly. Just 2018 is when TikTok came about. It's evolving quicker than we are able to keep up with it. So the research on social media is lagging behind. The government is lagging behind because they are technologically illiterate. They don't understand everything completely. And even researchers do not understand all of social media completely, because just over the past 10 to 20 years, it's been the evolution of social media, and we've noticed how it's changed and evolved. So it's progressing at a faster rate than we can keep up with. So for this research study, there were 3 primary research questions that were asked. So the first one is, what is the influence of social media usage? Now this is one variable on academic performance. It's a different variable. The first hypothesis was obviously higher levels of social media usage are associated with that negative academic performance. The second one, research question, this is a different variable. What is the influence of social media engagement? So this is a separate variable from the social media usage. What is the influence of that social media engagement on academic performance? Once again, higher levels of social media engagement associated with negative academic performance. Same thing for the third research question. Well, it should be a 3. What is the influence of social media addiction, which is a different variable than social media engagement and social media usage? Trying to see what is that social media addiction on academic performance. Higher levels are associated with negative academic performance, so higher scores. So before we get into how we're measuring that, first we're going to go and talk about the methods that were used in this research study. So undergraduate students here at South Alabama were asked to complete an online survey on Qualtrics, a free online survey platform. And respondents were recruited primarily from 2 ways. First way was an in-person systematic sampling method, which essentially is anyone who walks through the door, every 5th person, you pop the question, hey, would you like to participate in this research study? The second way was via the university's mass email system, and the 5 primary variables that were collected were social media usage, social media engagement, social media addiction variable, and academic performance, and then various demographics. So to measure social media usage, respondents were simply asked an open-ended question to report their average time spent on social media per day in an hours, minutes format. And to measure academic performance, students were asked to self-report their current GPA. Now for the scales, we have the social media engagement scale. So this is the scale that we use to quantify the social media engagement variable. So this scale asks questions, these 5 questions. In the past week, how often did you use social media in the 15 minutes before you go to sleep, in the 15 minutes after you wake up, when eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner? And for each question, there were 8 possible responses. So from not 1 day to 7 days of the week. And the way this was quantified is not 1 day is given a value of 1, whereas 7 days is given a value of 8. So if you respond 7 days, you're given a value of 8, and people who respond with higher scores have a higher social media engagement score. Social media addiction, to measure this is a similar method. The Bergen social media addiction scale was used. Both of these scales have been used in previous research studies. So this would ask these questions, spend a lot of time thinking about social media, planning how to use it. You feel an urge to use social media more and more. You try to use social media in order to forget about personal problems. You've tried to cut down on the use of social media without success. Become restless or troubled if you're prohibited from using social media. And you use social media so much that it's had a negative impact on your job/studies. And for each of these questions, there were 5 possible answers, from very rarely to very often. And for example, just like in the last one, very rarely was given a value of 1. And then we go 2, then we go 3, 4, and 5, all the way down. So similar to the last social media engagement variable, these values are averaged. So these values, after they're collected, you're going to average the scores together, and that'll give you the individual social media addiction score for that person. So the demographics that were collected were the date of birth, class cohort, whether they're freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, their race and ethnicity, their gender, their employment, religion, language spoken at home, political leaning, and the college/school that they are within at the University of South Alabama. So the limitations to the previous research is that a lot of studies utilize this self-reported data from questionnaires and surveys. Most of these studies were conducted prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and as we all know, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, a lot more people began to use social media, become engaged on social media, and so that's a limitation just from time itself. And for this particular research study, much of the previous research focused solely on social media usage and overlooks variables such as social media engagement and addiction. And then many of the studies that related the social media to academic performance, they were primarily performed on non-US residents. And then lastly, there's a generalizability issue due to demographics. And a lot of these studies don't meet demographic quotas to be able to generalize it from one population to another population. And same thing with my study, also has its own limitations. The utilization of self-reported survey data, which is mitigated by ensuring confidentiality, but there always is that limitation. And then there's also a generalizability limitation because the only respondents for this research study were undergraduate college students. So we can't just plop in and say this applies to everyone. So a total of 130 undergraduate students were collected for this research study from February 24th to March 18th of 2023. After removing certain data points for various reasons, a final total of 114 responses were reported, with the mean age being 21.35 and a standard deviation of 3.67. So this is our gender demographic results. As you can see, a large majority of the respondents were female compared to men. We also have the race, so a large majority being white, with the next being Black or African American, and then lastly, Asian. More demographics, there's a pretty relatively even distribution between the class cohort variable, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. As for their sexuality, most said that they were heterosexual or straight. As for employment, over half were employed, some were not. As for their religion, most respondents answered Christian. And as for the political leaning, this was a distribution that was interesting because we have the liberals, the moderates, and then the conservatives, and then 25% that just chose not to answer this question. And then this is the demographics of the colleges and schools that the respondents were in. So a large majority are in the College of Arts and Sciences, which makes sense because there's more degrees in the College of Arts and Sciences. And then obviously we have USA Health, so there's a lot of allied health majors that transfer right into USA Health with a bunch of other miscellaneous. So this is some of from the study, the descriptive statistics of the 4 variables that we were looking at, the social media usage, which was converted from hours and minutes format into completely minutes format. So let's look at this right here, the mean. So this was converted into minutes format for the social media usage. And then the social media engagement variable, which was measured using that social media engagement questionnaire, those values were averaged. And that was the average out of all the respondents. And then the addiction, same thing, that was the average out of all the respondents. And then the GPA variable was 3.41. Next, I performed a simple linear regression using the self-reported GPA as the dependent variable. So each of these variables is a separate simple linear regression. And we have the social media usage. In particular, notice the beta, that being the coefficient, and the p-value. So as we can see here, the p-value for this is low enough that there is statistical significance for the social media usage variable. And this negative means that as social media goes up, their self-reported GPA goes down. Same thing happened with the social media engagement and addiction, but these are not statistically significant due to these p-values. So, going back to our hypotheses, for the first one we talked about social media usage being associated with negative academic performance. We would reject our null hypotheses, meaning that the null hypothesis meaning there is no association, so we rejected it at a level of 0.01, that's being p-value. And then the other two hypotheses, these two alternative hypotheses were rejected, so we reject those and go with the null hypotheses, meaning that there is no association. So in terms of the first hypotheses, that data is consistent with previous research. Obviously that makes sense. As you use social media more, you have less time to study and complete assignments. The social media engagement variable, that is also consistent with previous research, because if you think about it, the social media engagement questionnaire is asking whether or not you're using it during lunch, dinner, and whenever you wake up. That is not really going to affect whether or not you have those habits of studying and completing assignments. But in terms of the social media addiction variable, the data that was collected in this study is not consistent with previous research. There could be a number of different possible reasons for this. First of which might be relatively small sample size of this study compared to a lot of the other studies. There might be more important factors, such as those studying and completing assignments, that are more important in determining one's GPA, and that social media addiction isn't necessarily impacting that. This is probably less likely, but the Bergen social media addiction scale is not a perfect measure of social media addiction. And these last two are important because individuals might be able to effectively manage their social media addiction, and they also might not be aware that they are addicted to social media, despite having the same symptoms as someone who is addicted to social media. So they might think that being addicted to social media is, there are levels to it. So those individuals might not realize that they actually are addicted to social media. But first, future research obviously should focus, before doing any of that, should focus clearly defining social media addiction, whether it is an addiction or a dependency, like we talked about earlier, before more effective conclusions can be drawn. So this is a multiple regression analysis using the self-reported GPA as the dependent variable. So all three of these variables were found to be statistically significant predictors of academic performance. The first one being social media usage, like we talked about. The second one I did not even think of, being male. And then Black or African American. So as we can see, all these values, they're negative right here. So that means as these values, or if you're male, if you're Black or African American, your social media usage goes up, then your self-reported GPA goes down. So first, there are many reasons why being Black might be associated with negative academic performance. Major reasons might include the lack of access to resources, the societal barriers, and the stereotype threat, which is when, let's say, you're taking an exam and your stereotype, being Black, has been known to perform worse on that exam compared to other demographics. So as a result, you're more likely to conform to that stereotype. Now, being male, this one was interesting. I never considered this one. Currently, there's actually a gender gap in our educational system where men are more likely to have lower grades in high school and primary school They're less ambitious to pursue higher education. They're less likely to complete that higher education, and these statistics, they might carry over into college, and as a result that their GPA is less than women. But future research could delve more deeply into any one of these variables. So now we're going to get into some different averages between male and female social media use. So this is average mean social media usage of females. This is average social media usage of males. And it's the important part I want you to look at. So I conducted an independent t-test to explore the difference between these male and female social media usage. And it was found to be statistically significant, as you can see here with this low p-value. And this agrees with previous research that females have higher levels of social media usage more than males. And there are multiple reasons that this is for this phenomenon, but one could be women are more relational, communicative than men. Some might be maybe women are more likely to communicate through written means rather than in face-to-face contact like men. It could be that advertising companies target women more than men, so as a result they're more likely to have higher levels of social media usage. And interestingly, one study that I found suggests that women's social media use is driven by their relational use, while men's social media usage is primarily driven by obtaining that general information on social media. But future research could delve more deeply into why is this statistic present. Next, we have descriptive statistics of social media usage between those identified as white and black or African American. So particularly look at the mean here. So black or African Americans had a higher mean than whites. So I conducted another independent t-test to explore the difference between those white and black and African American social media usage. And a statistical significance was found, showing that from our p-value. After further investigation, I really could not find any academic research studies that were found on this specific phenomenon. What I think it actually is that blacks are more likely to be Democrats than whites, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. But it also could be due to the relatively small sample size, or even the fact that maybe social media is providing an effective platform for blacks to amplify their voices, raise awareness about problems in their community, and discuss issues related to race and discrimination. But future research could delve more deeply into why this statistic is present. So we talked about Democrats and Republicans. So liberals, obviously more likely to be Democrats. Conservatives, more likely to be Republican. And this is their descriptive statistics of social media usage of the liberals. So you can see it's higher. And the conservatives, right here. So I conducted another independent t-test to see if this was statistically significant. And it was, right there. And previous research does demonstrate that Democrats are more likely to use social media than Republicans, which possibly could be, the last thing we're talking about, the blacks versus white social media usage, could be the reason that that statistic is present. Because there are demographic overlaps, because blacks and African Americans are more likely to identify as Democrat, whereas whites might be more likely to identify as Republican. Now, possible reasons why this statistic might be present is that liberals might be more open to engaging on social media and in political discussions than conservatives. And it could also be that social media platforms have a liberal bias, so as a result, social media users that are liberal are more likely to use social media due to that liberal bias. But future research could delve more deeply into why this statistic is present. The last two, I conducted a simple linear regression. So our social media engagement score that we talked about was the dependent variable, and the independent variable in this study is the class cohort. So, for example, freshman was given a value of 1, sophomores a value of 2, juniors a value of 3, seniors a value of 4. And so it was found that as you progress from freshman to senior, that social media engagement scores went down. So, and that's shown because of our negative coefficient and our statistically significant p-value. So there are possibly a number of reasons why that this could be present. I couldn't find any academic research that was found on this specific phenomenon. One could be obviously the relatively small sample size for the study, once again. It also could be that as individuals move into these higher class cohorts, they become more focused on their academic and career goals, so as a result, they're less likely to engage on that social media. And it also could be like a like-minded hypothesis. If you're surrounded by people who have those academic and career goals, you're going to be less likely to use social media as have a higher social media engagement score as a result. And the last one could be that individuals who are in lower class cohorts were exposed to social media at a younger age compared to the higher class cohorts, which is important because social media has been evolving over the past 10 to 20 years, and the age at which you were being exposed to social media is becoming younger and younger. But future research definitely verifies the statistic is reproducible, and any reasons why this might be present. But similarly, same thing was found with the social media addiction score as a dependent variable, and the class cohort once again being the independent variable. So statistical significance was found, and as the class cohort went from freshman to senior, the social media addiction score went down. And some of those same possible reasons, I could not find any academic research on this particular phenomenon, but some of the possible reasons are similar to the last one, with some additions, I guess you could say. Higher class cohorts might be more self-aware of their social media addiction, so they might take steps to mitigate it, control it, reduce it. And that could be from maybe observing their peers struggle with social media addiction, or observing themselves struggle with social media addiction. But future research, once again, should definitely verify if this statistic is reproducible. So with the conclusions, some of the future research where I think it should really go should be defining the exact parameters of what constitutes social media addiction and creating those demographic quotas to meet. Because once those demographic quotas are met and we can compare different research studies, more easy than what is currently being done. Lastly, we should also look at the impacts that each social network has on an individual level, because some are similar, but no two social media sites are completely the same. Like TikTok is not like Reddit, Facebook is not like Reddit. There are certain groups of social media sites that are similar, but no two are exactly identical. With that being said, I wanted to end on a quote. I'm a big science fiction novel, big science fiction movie kind of guy. And I want to end on a quote that's in a movie and book series from Ready Player One. So this movie, everyone's in this virtual reality world, and they spend a lot of time in this virtual reality world called the Oasis. And I think there are some parallels that can be drawn here where that statistic we talked about, 4 hours and 45 minutes, between that insane amount of usage per day. Similar, this movie, this book series kind of explores that idea. So I want to end on this quote. And it goes, "I'm not crazy about reality, but it's still the only place to get a decent meal." Thank you. Move into the questions? Is that what we do? Okay. Dr. Kim, are you still there?
Yep.
Awesome. So are there any questions about anything in particular? I can move through the slides.
What do you plan to do with this study? Do you plan to present it at a conference or publish it?
I would like to get this published. I definitely would like to set a goal to get this published. I think that would be interesting and cool.
There's a journal called Journal of Social Media Society.
that would
I think
fit?
this would fit in.
This
Yeah,
would fit.
maybe like abbreviate a little bit. It's like up to 25 pages.
Okay,
Yeah, this would fit in
Okay.
with the General Social Media Society to
okay.
get this published.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I know, I understand, yes, sir.
Yeah, I do social media
Yes, sir.
research, so that's, I
Dr.
can send you the link.
Of course, yeah, that'd be perfect. Dr. Kim, do you have any questions?
Actually not the question, but I have a few comments on the research descriptions.
Okay,
Yeah. Actually, I already know that you are considering about to submit the paper into the journal. So I would like to mention a few things in your research section. First, actually now I am in the table, but in the paper, but can we see the table too in your PowerPoint slide?
yes, ma'am. There it is.
Yeah, actually this table is just a descriptive statistics for 4 different measures, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, but in the third column, you mentioned that SE, it means that the standard error, right?
Yes,
Yeah, but in the descriptive statistics, we don't have the standard error because standard error is just assume the multiple samples within the population. So I think the standard deviation
So,
is a more
right.
correct
that makes
term
sense.
for the descriptive statistics.
Okay, so I should go in and change all that to standard deviation.
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
So
Okay,
I think I would like to be nice if you have all the standard deviation in more specifically the descriptive statistics table.
yes, ma'am. Okay,
And also in the regression table, I think you have a little bit different decimal point format. Someone is like 0.5, the other one is like 0.3 or something like that. So I do yeah, write this in the table 3, yeah.
right, yes, yes,
Mhm.
okay,
So if you have a really large decimal point, like the unstandardized coefficient for this SMU, you can make the note like this one is a really small value but still significant, so you can mention or you can use the note, the actual value, but in the table, if you unify the decimal point format, it will be better.
okay,
And the last one is that one. Under the adjusted R square value for the SME, that is the
Yes, ma'am.
negative 0.0066, right?
that's correct.
But statistically, R square is always a positive value, so could you recheck your
Yes, ma'am.
statistic output and correct?
Okay, yes, ma'am, I'll definitely do that.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I don't know why
really
that's it.
love to read all the papers, and you did a really good job on the
Okay.
paper.
Thank you.
And my last comment is a little bit related to the educational point of view. I mean, yeah, from an educational point of view, I mean, cognitive achievement like GPA that you use can draw to the various different kinds of the non-cognitive achievement, like the grit, goal progress, or any other like outcome expectation, something like that. So when you describe about the conclusion or discussion section, I mean, it would be better if other mentions were made of the importance of the non-cognitive achievement.
Okay, I think I understand.
Mhm. Yeah, that'll be all from me. And you did a great
Okay.
job.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
So was all this research done after the pandemic?
After the pandemic, that's correct.
I would like to see, and I think it would be great, if we compare this to before to see if there's any fluctuation in it. I think that would be
Mhm.
interesting.
Okay.
And I would also like to see, and if you talk about employment in here, I think it would also be cool if we asked what type of employment, because that employment could have something to do with social media.
Oh, that's true, yes.
And I think that would be interesting to delve deeper into that.
Okay.
Mhm.
I didn't find any statistical significance in employment, whether or not they were employed or not, didn't have any statistical significance on all kinds of different variables that I tried. But I understand what you're saying, that would make sense.
Yeah, overall, I think we did a great job.
Cool. What would be the next phase?
Obviously, people have to leave.
Yes, of course. Okay.
I know.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. All right. Awesome. You want me to leave this on?
You can, it's fine.
Okay.
Just give us like 5 minutes.
Yes, ma'am. I have Dr. Kim right here.
Perfect.
I don't know if you